Part 10. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 93. The monk also came over at this time, looked at Sudbai's reaction, and asked, "Amitabha, is it true?" Sudbai nodded, somewhat dumbfounded. "The old man whose head was smashed by my hoe has always been with me." The monk's face suddenly became very strange, as if he had suffered some internal injuries, and he didn't know what to say. The deduction that he and Gyatso, the two eminent monks, had originally made with certainty, turned out to be wrong with this wandering spirit. And it was obvious that the revenant was extremely low level, just an ordinary type that died unjustly. "Monk, is there any way to get rid of him?" Sudbai asked. "Obviously, he can't let this guy follow him all the time." This time it was just being trapped in the maze that affected the monk's deduction. The consequences are not very serious. If there is still a lot of danger here. If we are delayed by this thing for so long, the consequences will be really unimaginable. There are two ways. One is to convert him. After all, it is not easy for him. He thought he could escape by hiding under the bed, but then he came out with the hope of living and was smashed to death by you with a hoe. He must be very depressed under the great joy and sorrow. Coupled with the special attributes of this story world, so he became a ghost and followed you all the time. He may have been thinking of ways to mess with you and get revenge, but after all, he is a new ghost and does not have that ability for the time being. And because the poor monk and Gyatso are with you, he doesn't have the courage for the time being. The second method is to beat him so that his soul will fly away and he will never be reincarnated. Which method do you think is suitable, monk? Sudbai asked. Although Sudbai was leaning towards the latter, the former was obviously too troublesome, and Gyatso was still lost outside, so it was indeed more inconvenient here. Time-consuming. Amitabha, in fact, he is also a poor man. His village was massacred, and he escaped but was still killed. Alas, I am merciful, so we should just beat him to death. For him, it may not be the same. A relief. Monk, I like you very much because of this, really. Sudbai smiled. What should I do? Actually, you can do it yourself. It attaches to you because you are now in the state of an ordinary person. You directly become a zombie state. Zombies cannot enter the five elements and are abandoned by gods and ghosts. Once you become that state, he will no longer be able to cling to you and will naturally appear, leaving the rest to the poor monk. After listening to the monk's words, Sudbai immediately closed his eyes, his body began to become thinner, and his whole body exuded an evil and dirty aura. Then, the virtual image seemed to be bounced away from his body, and appeared in outside. The shadows became more solid. The sea of Buddha is boundless. The monk had a solemn appearance, grabbed it with one hand, and directly caught the wandering soul, and then recited the Vajra mantra. The little wandering soul was constantly twisted and pulled in the monk's mantra and palm, and finally it was like a balloon being blown. Just like that, it dissipates directly and becomes invisible. Okay, the poor monk can now start the deduction again. As if the monk finally relaxed, he sat down on the ground again and started to deduce. Obviously, the monk's previous two deductions were time-consuming and laborious but failed, and he also had a lot of anger accumulated in his heart. After finding out the truth, he couldn't spread this fire on Sudbai, so he ended up spreading it on this poor wandering soul. Sudbai returned to his original state, then shook his wrist, simply leaned against a pillar, closed his eyes and started to rest. He couldn't help with this kind of work anyway. He was still good at that kind of physical properties. Fighting, so just do it by yourself when you need it. Being able to recharge your batteries in the story world for a while is also very valuable. After about an hour passed, the monk stood up again. He was indeed a little tired. He walked to Sudbai and patted Sudbai's shoulder gently. Sudbai opened his eyes and smiled sheepishly. The monk he also smiled. He knew that Subai was sleeping very lightly and it was impossible for him to stand up before the other party woke up. However, both parties subconsciously did not break this unspeakable tacit understanding. The monk walked out of the door. Subai yawned and followed him. He passed through here and went around there. After walking for 2 minutes, he changed a dozen pools and pavilions. When he opened the door again, he saw someone standing there. Gyatso inside. When Gyatso saw the monk and Subai coming, he smiled and said, "I also calculated it again, but I found it was still wrong. Because there was an accident," the monk explained. "Now, we can go out. It has been delayed a lot of time." Under the leadership of the monk, the three of them continued to walk through the many pavilions. Finally, as another door in front of them was pushed open, the wilderness environment finally appeared in front of them, instead of the visible one. "I want to vomit in exactly the same hot spring pool." After walking out and looking back, there was only a lonely wooden hot spring pavilion, but it made people feel like they were in another world. At this time, the sky was already a little bright, which showed how long the three of them had been delayed inside. However, before the three of them could take a breath, there were bursts of rapid horse hooves coming from below. "There are no less than a few hundred people," Gyatso said after hearing the voice, "and there are hundreds of cavalry. They should be the Qing soldiers from the large army. After all, this is the Qing dynasty, and a convoy of Manchu nobles was attacked by the enemy here. It is natural for the Qing soldiers to immediately react and send a large force over. We can't walk from the front, so let's take a detour from the side." The monk walked to the other side of the mountain. From here, although there is no mountain road, it shouldn't be a big problem. If there are more than a dozen or dozens of cavalry coming from the opposite side, if three of them are together, there is nothing to be afraid of, they can easily kill them. But hundreds of cavalry, even cavalry from the cold weapon era, can kill 3 people with their lives. At this time, choosing to avoid the edge is a natural thing, and it does not violate the plot. After all, before they have followed the plot for a long time, otherwise the three of them would not have been trapped in the hot spring pool for so long. Now, proper seeking of advantages and avoiding disadvantages is also an inclusive aspect of the plot. If the characters in a story will only go, there are so many enemies, and the story is not good to watch. At this moment, the monk turned over first. His hands were very strong and he pinched directly into the crevices of the rocks. Then he hung his feet in the air and climbed down in this way. Gyatso used all 4 limbs together, like a dexterous ape. He is very comfortable between the stone walls. Subai slowly transformed into a vampire state. With his sensitivity and reflexes improved, his climbing speed was not much worse than those two. The three of them just went down the cliff at a very fast speed, avoiding the group of Qing soldiers. "Where are we going next?" Subai asked. "It will tell us." The monk looked up at the sky. Subai knew who the monk was referring to. Indeed, the horror broadcast would arrange everything, just as the listener was a plaything for the horror broadcast, and the horror broadcast was also a game for the listener, and the listener's understanding of the horror broadcast was some of the routines are pretty clear. Sure enough, when the three of them had just gone down about 100 meters, a raised platform appeared below. Gyatso jumped off first. The platform was large and strong, but because of the cover of 2 mountains, it was difficult to climb from the bottom of the mountain, or this location was invisible on the mountain, so Subai and the monk jumped down immediately. Gyatso pointed to the inside of the platform, put his hands on his hips, and gasped, "Take a rest, and then go in." Subai looked inside the platform, on the side of the mountain. There was a sunken hole. Originally, this was nothing, but at the entrances on both sides of the hole, there were 2 mummies covered by dust. The monk walked up to a mummy, reached out and brushed off the thick dust on the mummy, revealing an extremely damaged cassock. There was also a string of Buddhist beads wrapped around the wrist of the mummy, but the beads had been broken, not to mention the spiritual energy. Even the ornamental value is gone. Sudbai walked to the other mummy, dusted it off, clicked his tongue, turned around and waved to Gyatso who was resting there. Gyatso, your relatives are calling you. Gyatso heard the sound and came over, and then stared. The mummy was actually wearing llama clothes, and there was a golden wheel beside it, but the golden wheel had cracked. The monk and Gyatso looked at each other. At the entrance of the cave, there were actually the bones of a Central Plains monk and a Tibetan monk, which happened to be opposite to them. Sudbai stood outside the entrance of the cave and looked at both sides. See if it's you. If we encounter any reincarnation tricks again this time, it would be too boring, and it seems that reincarnation happens once every 10 years. The monk and Gyatso shook their heads together. Apparently, they were sure that the bones had nothing to do with them. That would not be reincarnation. It must be a coincidence. The corpses of the two monks indicate that there are terrible and mysterious things in the cave, which is just in time for us, Sudbai said. The monk nodded, shook his head, and then looked at Sudbai. Gyatso also looked at Sudbai. Look what I do, Sudbai asked. If another vampire corpse appears, it won't be a coincidence, the monk said. Haha, but there are only 2 human corpses here. Where is mine? Sudbai smiled and shrugged. However, the next moment, his smile froze on his face. A rock 2 meters above the cave suddenly loosened and fell down. No one was hit, but it was broken. There was a rock inside. The weathered carcass of a large bat. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 94. Looking at the weathered bat corpse in front of him, Sudbai nodded. It's possible, it's really possible. This time they really all live together, none of the 3 of them are left behind, they all have it. The main mission hasn't been triggered yet, so we have no choice but to follow the prompts and follow the plot. However, for the time being, let the poor monk recite a rebirth spell for the 2 seniors here. It won't take too long. The monk clasped his hands together, looked solemn, and began to recite scriptures. Even though the souls of the 2 mummies had long since disappeared, it was still a sign of respect. Gyatso stood next to the monk, with his eyes closed and his lips pouting, probably reciting something. Both monks were reciting sutras to their seniors for salvation. Sudbai looked at the corpse of the Central Plains monk and then at the corpse of the Tibetan monk. He sighed and moved the bat corpse over and placed it between the 2 mummies. Take it with you, by the way. After everything was taken care of, the 3 of them were ready to enter the cave. The entrance to the cave was initially rocky, but it was a little flat and easy to walk on. However, as they continued deeper, it turned into soft black soil, with a slight stalemate feeling. There is a very unsteady feeling when you step on it. It seems that you will fall down with the next step. Moreover, this is the mountainside position, and it even goes a little higher, so if there is any hollow crack below, you will fall down. Death is really not impossible. After walking in for about 20 minutes, there was a fork in the road ahead. Just as the monk and Gyatso continued walking forward, Sudbai raised his hand and said, "Wait a minute." The monk and Gyatso stopped and turned to look at Sudbai. Sudbai squatted down and touched the ground with his palms. The light in the cave was not very good, but it was not without light. There were always gaps in some places that let in some morning sunlight. Of course, when walking with this little light, I can only see a vague outline of the ground. After careful identification, Sudbai clapped his hands and stood up. There was another group of people who passed before us. There are footprints below, but they are not very clear, but we can confirm that they were from not long ago. There were quite a few people in that group, there should be more than 5 people, and they were wearing it's not the cloth shoes or slippers that the 3 of us are wearing, but boots, all boots. The monk and Gyatso looked at each other, and the monk said, "It should be the rest of the audience." And they are also in a group. Sudbai continued to analyze, Let's walk a little slower and slow down a little more. Since there are people walking in front of us, we are also happy to let the people in front help us find the way. The monk nodded and slowed down with Gyatso. The three of them walked like this, more like a tourist outing. However, because they knew there was an audience in front of them, the uneasiness in their hearts slowed down a lot. However, the good times did not last long. A black shadow appeared on the road ahead, and he was lying on a stone. Gyatso sensed it from a long distance with his eyes closed, and confirmed, "It's a dead person, and he died not long ago." Gyatso had the ability to confirm life from a distance. He had previously judged from a long distance that there was no one alive in the hot spring pool. After he confirmed it, the three of them continued to move forward. The dead man was wearing a black jacket. There was a wound on his chest as big as a bowl, as if a large piece of flesh had been dug out by a claw. The chest was also collapsed. He should have been killed by a single blow. It looked like he should be a man around 30 years old. Sudbai habitually reached out and groped in the deceased's clothes pocket. When he touched the trousers pocket and found that the pocket had been turned inside out, Sudbai couldn't help but smile. His companion left him before he left. "I touched everything on his body and there was nothing left." Actually, the person who killed him was probably his companion. Gyatso looked at the wound of the deceased and said, "If such a large wound was caused by an alien, it would have to be at least the size of a tiger or cheetah, but as the audience at least has enough alertness and life-saving means. If the alien is so big, it should be difficult to completely hide it. The possibility of him being killed directly in front of him is not very high, and there are no signs of struggle nearby. Since they are a team, it is impossible for him to die alone, and the rest of them did not even show signs of fighting with aliens. Is there internal strife in the team?" Sudbai said. "You can't be that stupid. At this time and in this place, not only are they fighting among themselves, but they are actually killing each other. What happened to them? Don't use a completely rational thinking model to analyze all the audiences. At least I know that there are many people who act unscrupulously even after entering the story world. However, such people have not died." Monk at this time, he spoke, then stretched out his hand to close the eyelids of the deceased, and looked forward again. "Since the opponent's team has been in internal strife, our speed should be increased appropriately at this time." Sudbai nodded. He understood what the monk meant. If the team in front was like his own team and paid attention to caution in everything, then following such a team would indeed avoid a lot of troubles. It is dangerous and troublesome, but if the team in front is in chaos, or even has internal strife, it will not be a lucky thing to follow them. God knows what kind of trouble it will cause and be affected. The three of them accelerated their pace and continued walking forward. However, as they walked, another corpse appeared in front of them. This time it was the body of a woman. She was in her early 20s. She was quite good looking, but it was the same. A large piece of flesh had been dug out of her chest, which was fatal with one blow. There was nothing in her pockets, and her ears were pierced. But there are no earrings or other accessories. I don't know if they were touched together or if they were taken off before entering the story world. Sudbai inspected the body and said with thoughtful eyes, "Something is wrong." The monk shook his head. "There is indeed something wrong, and something doesn't make sense. If it was an internal conflict, it would be a bit strange to kill two teammates twice in a row and leave the bodies here," Gyatso added. "Internal strife is not about making love, but also thinking about scoring twice or 4 or 5 times in a night. If you can't end it at once, this is the second corpse. I even have a hunch that there may be a third corpse ahead." Sudbai touched his chin, then squatted down again, even lying on the ground, and began to continue checking the marks on the ground. The monk did not disturb Sudbai, but continued to inspect the body. Gyatso stood there, looking around, as if on alert. Finally, Sudbai seemed to have discovered something. He raised his hand and called the monk and Gyatso to come over. If the monk and Gyatso were professionals in fighting ghosts and dealing with supernatural events, then this kind of observation and discovery of subtle details is what Subai is good at. After all, he has been a murderer before and organized a murder club. He has more hands-on practice than some detective enthusiasts on the internet. You see, the traces and number of footprints at, behind, and in front of where the woman died have not changed, increased, or decreased. In fact, I can still vaguely remember the previous footprints, after the man died. Before and after the position, even up to here, the traces of the footprints have not changed significantly. If it can be explained that the man and the woman wore soft-soled shoes and did not leave too obvious traces, but I paid special attention before. The man's corpse was wearing professional hiking boots with nails on the bottom. The woman's feet were also a pair of women's leather boots with high heels. When they were walking, they were wearing. It's impossible not to leave traces on this soft black soil. Speaking of this, Subai couldn't help but pursed his lips. "Say what you think," the monk said. Subai smiled and said, "The team in front of us may not have encountered internal strife. There is even a guess in my mind that they don't even know that there are already 2 teammates in their team, dead." "You mean, there was something in the team in front that secretly killed the people in the team, turned into their appearance, and blended into the team," the monk said. "It should be like this," Gyatso said with some worry. "What should we do?" "Go up and remind them. Since those ghosts use this method, they probably feel that they can't eat that group of people in one go, but if they really continue to be, if the cannibalization continues like this, that group of people will probably be wiped out inexplicably." The monk agreed. "Since those ghosts appeared in this cave, they will inevitably not take action against us after dealing with the group in front. If that group of people all died so inexplicably, it would be a shame for us. Because of the relationship, sooner or later the spearhead will be aimed at us. They should not be very far away from us. If we speed up and catch up with them, it won't take long to catch up with them. We don't want them to accept any favors. They will die later, or, if we die slowly, it will be beneficial to us." "Don't be anxious," Subai suddenly spoke at this time, with a hint of uncertainty on his face, and said, "Let's not worry about other teams' affairs in a hurry. Should we first determine if anyone in our own team has been transferred? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 95. On the soft ground, the monk squatted next to a male corpse, rubbing his fingers on the male corpse's arm. Here, there were scriptures that seemed to be birthmarks. This appeared very strange and unusual, because this was not a tattoo. There won't be such a clear feeling of lines, but if it is really a birthmark, then this person is even more buggy than the reincarnation of a living Buddha. What kind of real Buddha can actually show Buddhist patterns on his body after reincarnation? However, this Buddhist pattern is a bit difficult to understand. It seems to contain a lot of truth, but it seems to be separated by a layer of veil, making it difficult for the monk to understand it all at once. However, for the monk, this kind of thing is simply an addiction. When you encounter drugs, you will naturally become addicted to them. Finally, the monk came up with some clues. This Buddhist pattern is not modern, but can even be traced back to thousands of years ago. At that time, after the Buddhist culture was introduced to the Han dynasty, it had not been completely transformed into a readable language suitable for the Han people. The form, for example, has so-called Chinese characteristics, so it has a strong primitive atmosphere. Therefore, the monk, who has received the most orthodox Central Plains Buddhist culture, will find this pattern a bit unfamiliar. Suddenly, the monk realized that he seemed to have been meditating for a long time. He was a little embarrassed to have Subai and Gyatso waiting for him here. He might as well copy the Buddhist principles and then study them, or simply copy them. It is easier to peel off this layer of human skin, since monks are always informal in this regard. However, at this moment, the monk suddenly found that there was no one around him. Subai and Gyatso had gone somewhere, and he was left alone squatting next to the male corpse. And then, the arm of the male corpse, the Buddhist patterns on it actually began to fade at this time, and finally disappeared completely. The monk took a deep breath, stood up. He knows. Got it? There is a totem-like tattoo on the neck of the female corpse. The tattoo depicts an animal, a very strange animal. In fact, it does not exist at all in reality. It only exists in some ancient tantric books, similar to there are myths like Daudi and Pixiu. Gyatso has been staring at this tattoo. The tattoo is very interesting. It should have been drawn by a Tibetan monk with his own charm. It has a kind of atmosphere that belongs to it. Gradually, while looking at this totem, a group of black smoke began to gather behind Gyatso, as if he was about to step on the black clouds and rise up like the beast on the tattoo. Gyatso was experiencing and comprehending. Finally, it seemed that he finally thought of something, and Gyatso suddenly woke up. He didn't know how long he had been obsessed with comprehending this totem, but he thought it must have been a long time. But why didn't the two teammates around him remind him? Is it just because I'm embarrassed? But they are not the kind of people who would be embarrassed. Gyatso raised his head, his eyes focused. How? Are you alone? First of all, we should first confirm whether anyone in our own team has been transferred. After Subai said this, his eyes kept staring at Gyatso and the monk. The monk nodded. Indeed, I agree. Gyatso said, is this considered forcibly creating internal strife? Just to be on the safe side, we can look down on the people in the front team as much as possible. They may be mentally retarded, they may be too careless, they may be too low level and too low level, they may be too far behind us, so it is precisely because of so many it is possible that two people in their team have been replaced without knowing it. But what if we think differently? The people in the front team are not stupid, and may not be as smart as us, but they failed to discover that their teammates were transferred, which means that the people who were transferred have terrible disguise skills, enough to make the fake look real. Subai said while watching the reactions of Gyatso and the monk, and then there was no special reaction from the two people. Then how should we check now? Gyatso pointed to himself. Tell the truth. Or show your ability. Subai shook his head. This is just a guess. I guess there aren't that many of those ghost things, and the attention should be focused on the team in front. They shouldn't be able to estimate us for the time being. Besides, it would be too difficult for us guys to be transferred silently. If the other party really had this ability, they could have simply attacked us all to death, and there is no need to hide it like this. Yes, the monk said. Gyatso nodded, indeed. So, let's go forward now and catch up with the team in front. At least we already know which two people in the team in front have been transferred. In this way, we can catch those two ghosts who are pretending to be real. Once these people are let, the pretense of being a ghost is exposed, their mystery is torn away, and they are no longer so scary. The three of them continued to walk forward, and obviously sped up. As they walked, soon, another body appeared in front of them. Gyatso closed his eyes and confirmed, I just died, I just breathed my last. The monk put his hands together and recited the Buddha's name, Amitabha. Subai stood there, motionless. Then, the monk and Gyatso remained motionless. A faint smile appeared on the corner of Subai's mouth. During this short period of time when the three of them remained motionless in tacit agreement, Subai closed his eyes, and his body began to become thinner, directly turning into a zombie form. The monk and Gyatso just looked at Subai. I always feel that this time is a bit unusual, so I will go there like this. Monk, didn't you say before that zombies are not among the 5 elements, do not enter reincarnation, and are hated by gods and ghosts, so I will treat them as amulets. As soon as he finished speaking, Subai started to run towards the corpse. Yes, he ran towards it. The monk and Gyatso immediately followed. However, Subai kept his eyes closed while running. Even when he passed the third corpse, he did not open his eyes to take a look at it, nor did he pay any attention to it. He just acted like a zombie. The state ran past. Gyatso and the monk stood next to the third corpse. They did not take another step forward, but just watched quietly as Subai ran further and further away from their sight. Immediately, the two looked at each other and saw that the other's face was melting. After running for a certain distance, in order to save his energy, Subai returned to his original state. He sat down on a protruding rock on one side. In front of him, he was so dark that he didn't know the way ahead. Behind him, he couldn't easily run. The way back. The two fake guys were almost exactly the same as the monk and Gyatso. Their imitations were really lifelike, and they were indeed enough to be fake. Subai didn't find any flaws. However, sometimes, for many things, you don't need to start with actual details, but you can just go with feelings. Because Subai clearly noticed that after passing the first male corpse, the monk became much quieter. Although he still spoke, communicated, and responded in a way that was very consistent with the monk's character, he always felt that something is missing. As for the missing thing, a monk or Gyatso might not understand it, but Subai can understand and feel it, that is, IQ. Because from the moment he entered the world of the story, or even from the first time he met the monk in Tibet and then went to complete the mission with him, Subai has always been in a very relaxed state, because the monk will plan everything well. Everything will be arranged, and you just need to follow it. Gyatso is obviously a person like this. He doesn't talk much, but his acting style is very crisp and neat, which is very similar to that of a monk. This is a ghost story world, so before entering the story world, Subai said with a smile that he could hug two thighs this time. In fact, he did so. Since entering the story world, he has, except for the loss of defense and the killing of an ordinary person who made a negative contribution, basically nothing else was done. The monks and Gyatso were at the forefront. It's like playing a team competition game. With two great teammates supporting the field, you can easily compete and share experience with them after winning. Subai has always felt like this before. I also feel that except for encountering the kind of impossible fighting situation, there should be no need to do anything by myself. However, after entering the cave and meeting the first male corpse, Subai suddenly felt that the atmosphere in the team was wrong. At that time, he had not fully realized it. After waiting for the second female corpse, this feeling became more and more intense. It became obvious and was finally captured by Subai. When did the role in this team suddenly change to that of being the leader on the front line of discovering and analyzing situations? The positions of the first male corpse and the second female corpse were two nodes. At those two positions, the monks and Gyatso in his team changed, and the team in front also died at those two positions. People. Therefore, when facing the third corpse, Subai knew in his heart that this should be the third node, so he rushed over in zombie state without stopping or pausing, just rushed over. Later, Subai succeeded, and Gyatso and the monk did not catch up. This also confirmed Subai's own guess. Subai suddenly laughed at himself. He was indeed interesting. He actually had an advantage by playing soy sauce. So if the other party chooses to transfer the contract first to him, it is hard to say whether the monk and Gyatso can sense it. After all, they are here. In this story world, even if you are always taking the lead, and the teammates behind you continue to follow suit, it will be difficult for them to find anything wrong. At this moment, Subai felt that his palms were a little sticky. He immediately stood up and looked at the stone he was sitting on. He put his hand in and touched it. From the darkness, he actually touched something. The furry thing doesn't look like animal hair, but more like human hair. Subai pursed his lips, stretched out his hands to grab the thing, and pulled it out. An almost completely distorted corpse was dragged out from the gap in the stone by Subai. The blood of the previous corpse was splashed on the stone, so Subai felt sticky when his palms were pressed against the stone. This is the fourth corpse, is also the fourth node. And Subai has been sitting here for a long time. Subai patted his forehead, feeling very hurt. Can you, damn, stop dying so secretly? Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 96. Different from the death characteristics of the previous corpses, this corpse died more miserably. In the previous ones, a large piece of flesh was dug out from the chest, but this corpse was more like being twisted and turned. The bones of the body were probably completely dislocated and broken. Even someone like Subai, who had killed many people and was barely considered a half-executioner, couldn't help but feel a little numb when he saw this kind of death. What on earth did this guy do to cause him to be treated differently? Subai was different from the monk. The monk seemed to have a great interest in corpses after entering the story world, so he checked every corpse, while Subai was unwilling to go in this dark place. He carefully groped for a corpse that had died in such a miserable state, so he took a few steps back to leave, but his back touched a transparent film. Turning around and stretching out his hands, an invisible barrier really appeared, blocking Subai's hands. Then, Subai felt that his feet began to become softer and softer, just like the asphalt concrete on the asphalt road became extremely soft in the summer. In fact, this situation gradually became more obvious, because Subai's the legs had sunk directly into the soft black soil. Subai spread his hands flat, intending to increase his force-bearing area and lift himself out. However, when Subai's palms also touched the ground, a suction force came and his palms were directly submerged into the black soil. There was absolutely nothing he could do now. Both his hands and legs were stuck in the black earth, and there was no strength point for him to bear the strength. Subai was very frustrated. In the end, even his head was about to be submerged. Subai had no choice but to not taking a deep breath beforehand. His whole body was sticky. This was a desperate feeling of being buried alive. For ordinary people, this feeling of being slowly buried alive was enough to make people collapse. Subai didn't collapse, but it wasn't much better. Many thoughts appeared in his mind for a while, but before Subai could sort out a specific thought, his feet suddenly let go, and then he sank, and then his whole body fell down. Underground, there was actually thick blood, like a stream, but the flow rate of the blood was obviously more rapid than the stream. At the same time, there was an interlayer about 2 meters high between the top of the bloody stream and the black soil. Looking up, Subai found that the black soil was not actually hanging on top. Underneath the black soil, there were layers of existence that looked like the human blood network. They were bright red and hot. These things grew like fungi, and then lifted the black soil into the air. Got up. Although the blood under his feet exuded a strong stench, like spoiled food that had been left there for who knows how many years, the feeling of surviving a disaster still made Subai feel that his brain was suddenly lacking oxygen. Buzz. The blood water was not very deep, only about half a meter, but in such a shallow blood water, a spiral hole suddenly appeared, and then a tentacle stabbed directly over, and the target was very clear, it was Subai's chest. The tentacle came so fast, like a bullet. Not to mention that Subai was in a state of exhaustion for the rest of his life, even at his peak state, he probably couldn't dodge it. Puff. Subai's chest was pierced directly by the tentacle, and his whole body was lifted up. It hurts, it hurts. This painful feeling was heartbreaking, because it was really heartbreaking. Subai almost fainted, but his survival instinct still allowed him to force himself to stay awake. The tentacle pierced Subai's chest, but Subai did not die. This was felt by the tentacle, and then, it seemed strange to the tentacle, why did its target not die? Considering Subai's physique, being penetrated like this would be extremely harmful, but if he wanted to die directly like an ordinary person, he would be underestimating Subai's vampire physique. But what happened next was uncomfortable. As if to further confirm whether Subai was dead or not, the tentacles began to shake up and down. Subai was sometimes smashed into the sea of blood, and sometimes was smashed onto the black soil, like the lace of a rattle, kept rising. Turn down and throw. Grass. Subai could only utter one syllable like this, and then his head was hit hard in the blood, and then he was lifted up again, and his body fell on the black soil, but there should be barbs on the tentacles, which penetrated Subai his chest, then hooked Subai's body in reverse, making it impossible for Subai to break away. Moreover, under such a violent impact and toss, Subai couldn't break free. However, vampires are not immortal beings. In fact, Subai's vampire level is not very high and cannot reach the level of a real high-level vampire. Therefore, under such continuous injuries, Subai felt that his body's activity was rapidly increasing. The feeling of hunger has subsided, and has hit his whole body. He is really going to die, he is really going to die, because at this time, he has no blood beads to devour and recover. He has to passively bear the damage. Subai cannot hold on at all. How long? Finally, Subai's eyes fell on the blood. This blood exuded a strong stench. For Subai, a vampire, it only felt disgusting and was not food at all. But in this case, Subai Shiro had no other choice. When Subai was hit by a tentacle into blood again, he opened his mouth and began to swallow the blood. Being tossed up and down again and again, swallowing wildly again and again. Subai didn't know if drinking the blood here would have any effect, but at least, he was still alive, yes, not dead yet. However, being thrown around like this, Subai felt that the bones in his body could not withstand it, and there were fractures in many places. Don't you just want me to die? Then I'll die. Subai let out a roar from his chest, and his body began to change into a vampire state. His heart stopped beating, and the vitality of his whole person completely disappeared, and then he became motionless. The tentacles stopped their previous crazy movements at this moment. It seemed that for this tentacle, it was a relief that the target was finally dead. Then Subai was hung like this and began to move with the tentacle. This feeling is no different from a parade, except that there is a lack of audience. However, the audience soon came. The tentacle dragged Subai to a corner of the creek, where there was a relatively empty stone platform. Then the tentacle flicked, and Subai was thrown heavily onto the stone platform. Subai remained motionless, but he was lying face down, and the wound had begun to heal slowly. The tentacle retracted into the blood. From this angle, it didn't look like an animal's tentacle, but more like the roots of a plant. At this time, a burst of Suana sound suddenly came from the surroundings. It was very festive, as if preparing to welcome a bride. To be honest, Subai had only heard this kind of Suana sound when he was very young. In the past 10 years, it has really become I have never heard of it again. A man in red satin clothes rode a horse and came slowly, surrounded by many people. Among the people gathered, 7 or 8 were playing the Suana, which was very harsh, but also had a rhythm. However, these people's faces were frighteningly pale, and their cheeks had too much blush, which reminded Subai of the paper people he saw in his second-story world. They were almost another copy of the paper people. The man in red clothes riding a horse, the horse is being carried forward by several paper figures, not walking on its own, because the horse is completely made of paper, made of bamboo strips as a skeleton, and is not walking on its own. It's a real horse. As for the man on the horse, he showed a little more life than those around him who were playing the Suana and driving the horse. He was not a paper man, but he didn't seem to be a human either, because his face was completely a blur of flesh and blood. There is no skin on his face, and the two eyeballs are shrunk in the flesh and blood, suddenly protruding and suddenly disappearing, which looks very strange. The clothes on his body are festive red, but it can be seen that they are very old, and they are pieces of things were pieced together on the body, and they were pieced together to create a festive gesture. This is a very strange team, and their appearance quickly lowers the temperature here. Several Suana players came over and helped Sudbai up, or it would be more appropriate to lift him up. Sudbai did not resist. At this time, Sudbai was still in the recovery stage, but his eyes were slightly open, and he was still recovering. It's not like you completely close your eyes and pretend to be dead. Of course, this slight opening is actually more like the state of a dead person. Several people carried Sudbai to the man on horseback. The man happily began to rock around on the horse. The joy was beyond words. Although he had no face, his emotions were even stronger. Then the man waved, and several people lifted Sudbai closer to the man. The man's hand began to fumble on Sudbai's face, as if looking at a piece of clothing. Yes, a dress. Sudbai just watched the man keep touching his face, and at the same time, he was also calculating in his heart the extent of his injuries and his remaining strength, whether he could still kill everything in front of him after turning into a zombie. It's just that Sudbai doesn't know the depth of this man, so he hasn't acted rashly yet. The man touched Sudbai's face, and his mood seemed to be getting lower and lower. His depression directly affected the interest of the people playing the Suana around him. In the end, the sound of the Suana was so low that it was almost like a whimper. Finally, the man waved his hand towards Sudbai and motioned to his men to move Sudbai away. The disgusting look on his face was extremely clear. Sudbai's chest could not help but rise and fall slightly at this moment. He actually dislike. I'm ugly. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 97. Sudbai was disliked. Obviously, the man was not satisfied with Sudbai's human skin. He didn't even have the interest to tear it off and stick it on his face. He just waved his hand and asked his men to throw Sudbai into the river of blood again. Go back and forth wherever you go, this is a kind of relief for Sudbai. Boom. Sudbai, who fell into the blood river again, still maintained the vampire state, with no heartbeat and no temperature. On the stone platform, a man was riding a paper horse being carried by others and was about to leave. However, at this moment, a sharp cry suddenly came, like crying and complaining, very urgent, like a woman complaining about being hungry, thirsty to the point of being unable to extricate herself, urgently needing, urgently craving. The man turned around nervously, and then touched his face subconsciously. He seemed to be going to meet someone very important, but he hadn't found the human skin he liked yet, and he still had no face to meet people, so he subconsciously started in panic. The servants who were playing the Suana around the man were so frightened that their bodies began to protrude, and even their arms and legs began to seem to be separated from their bodies. Obviously, the men were afraid of these papery creatures. People are even more afraid to the core of their being. The man immediately waved again, making a harsh rubbing sound from his mouth, and asked his men to pull the body back. Although he didn't really like the pretty face, he had no other choice now. He doesn't like a few human skins, and there are also women. If he goes to meet that person with a woman's face, the end will definitely be very miserable. Sudbai, who fell into the bloody water, was quickly picked up by the tentacles, and then inserted into the black soil above like an onion. The fungi on the black soil began to open, and actively squirmed to send Sudbai upward. Sudbai finally knew how those people who died. They were all pulled down by the soft black soil at specific locations, or specific spatial nodes. The wounds on their chests were then killed by the tentacles. After being killed, Sudbai didn't feel dirty when his body was in the black soil, because at this time, It seemed that countless microorganisms were cleaning the dirt on his body, and there was not even any blood left in his clothes. His whole body was simply worse than I took a shower and was wiped down by a maid to make it even cleaner. However, just when Subai's head came out from the ground and Subai just breathed a sigh of relief, his feet were suddenly grabbed by something, and then a force came from below, and Subai immediately opened his mouth. He opened his mouth and took another breath, and then his head sank into the black soil again. Soon, Subai was pulled out from underneath again. It was still the same tentacle, but this time Subai observed it very carefully. He saw that there was a light moss color on the tentacles. Subai thought that the tentacles were not strong enough before. It looks like an animal, more like the well-developed roots of a plant, and that's indeed what it looks like now. Several paper figures stood on the edge of the stone platform, scattering something blue into the blood, and then the tentacles slowly placed Subai on the stone platform again. The paper figures lifted Subai up and stood in front of him. The man behind him urged the people below to carry him away quickly. Going down from the stone platform, there was a downward slope, and there were actually traces of man-made carvings. Going further down, Subai even saw villages, but these villages did not see sunlight all year round, and they were made of stones. It's old, and it doesn't look like there are real people living inside. It has more of a symbolic meaning. A sedan chair appeared in front. The faceless man entered the sedan chair first, and then several paper figures carried Subai in. Then these paper figures lifted the sedan chair together, as if rushing to welcome the bride, while the faceless man, the first thing is to change the face in the sedan chair. The raw materials are naturally obtained from Subai's corpse. The man's nails were very sharp, like nail clippers. He first rubbed Subai's face, like a tailor measuring the cloth. Then, when everything was ready, the man began to prepare for cutting. After struggling for such a long time, Subai's injuries finally recovered. Although his body was still very weak, how could he continue to pretend to be dead when people were ready to cut his face? The next moment, the faceless man began to knife, and the sharp nails pierced Subai's face directly. However, what surprised the faceless man was that his nails did not look like they had pierced the body of a dead person. It was like piercing a hard stone, and there was even a crisp sound, and two of his nails broke directly. When he looked closely, he saw that in front of him was the corpse of a human being who had just died. It was clearly a zombie. This zombie was staring at him with its blue eyes. Subai's 10 fingers grew 10 black nails in an instant, carrying corpse poison and cold poison. Then when the faceless man realized that he had changed and was stunned, he took action directly and stabbed the faceless man's fingernail with one hand. In his eyes, there was also a hand stabbing into the neck of the faceless man. Puff. Puff. Subai tried his best this time. He didn't know the real depth of the faceless man, but at such a close range and a sneak attack, no matter how powerful the faceless man was, he couldn't take advantage of him. In fact, the effect of the sneak attack exceeded Subai's expectation, and this faceless man actually seemed not as experienced as Subai had imagined before, and he felt like the embroidered pillow was useless. The cold poison directly invaded the faceless man's head, and his whole head was covered with a layer of frost. Subai returned to his previous state, looking very tired. After tossing for so long, his body was still constantly shaking. Injured, if it weren't for the blood in the blood river that seemed to be of some use, he might have died long ago. The body of the faceless man sat quietly in the sedan, and the sedan slowly fell down. At this time, it must have arrived at its destination. Subai struggled to sit up and quickly took off his clothes. These clothes were all clothes found in the village before. It was very simple for ancient people to take off their clothes. Then Subai took off the red clothes wrapped around the faceless man. He pulled off the strip of cloth and wrapped it around himself, and finally casually covered the faceless man with his own clothes. After finishing all this quickly, Subai couldn't help but be a little shocked at his own quick wit. Sure enough, people's thinking activity in emergencies is much higher than usual. A paper man came to the sedan chair and waited. Sudbai took a deep breath. These red cloth strips were very dirty and old, with a stale atmosphere, but Sudbai still remained calm, opened the curtain of the sedan chair, and walked down. Here, it is no longer that empty outside, but has a feeling similar to a crack in the ground. However, there are actually traces of houses on it. However, due to the age and the long-term movement of the rock layer, these houses are only, it looks like there is still a bit of a house, but in fact not much is left. Sudbai is now in an independent space. In front of it, there is a bed. The bed was supposed to be carved from wood, but the wood has been damaged or even collapsed in many places over time, so the collapsed locations were stacked with stones. When raised up, it generally looks like a bed. The bed is all covered with colorful rags, layered one after another, and there is a skull at the head of the bed. There is a green will-o'-the-wisp burning inside the skull. In this way, it is used as a bedroom lamp to illuminate this place. It made it even more eerie. After Sudbai got off the sedan, all the paper figures retreated, and none of them disappeared. On the bed, among the colorful cloth strips, something began to squirm. The extent of the squirming was not very large, but very clear. Immediately afterwards, a hand came out from inside, and then hooked his finger at Sudbai. Simply speaking, from the perspective of this hand, this is the hand of a very beautiful woman, even enough to make a hand mold, but Sudbai will not take it for granted that there is a beautiful woman hidden under these rags. As a beautiful woman, Sudbai did not expect that he would have the fragrant, erotic encounter that Ningkechan encountered when he met the fox demon. In fact, among these dirty rags and an environment that exudes the smell of corpses, even if a beautiful woman strips herself naked and stands in front of you, it is difficult for you to have the urge to get hard. Besides, there are lessons learned from the faceless man in it. God knows what kind of dirty and disgusting things are in it. However, now Sudbai seems to have some understanding of the identity of the faceless man. No wonder the embroidered pillow is not useful. He is just a face person, and it is very hard to be a face person. It is estimated that in order to satisfy the master's novelty, he has to keep changing the face of different people, constantly changing into the appearance of other people, and making his face appear again and again. Tear off the top and replace it with other skins. Come to think of it, this is also a kind of torture for the faceless man. Killing him myself can be regarded as a relief for him. The hand was hooked for a long time, and it was felt that Sudbai hadn't even taken a step forward. The air pressure around him suddenly dropped, and the will-o'-the-wisp suddenly became strong at this time, as if reflecting the state of mind of someone on the bed. Obviously, the person on the bed was already a little impatient. Immediately afterwards, a faint voice came from the bed, and kept echoing between the narrow rock walls. The voice was intermittent, but it carried a kind of solemn majesty. Not yet, come quickly, wait, for bed. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 98. Sudbai looked left and right, then lowered his head and began to walk forward, towards the bed. He walked very calmly and naturally, as if he had accepted his fate. However, only Sudbai knew clearly. All the sensitivities of my body were raised to the highest point at this time, and my breathing became extraordinarily long. The other party finally seemed to be satisfied with Sudbai's attitude and retracted his hand, but then there were friction sounds on the bed, and Sudbai frowned slightly. This guy is grinding his teeth. Sudbai had tried his best to vilify the woman on the bed in his mind in advance, but now it seemed that he had not uglified it enough. What kind of ghost could make such a harsh grinding sound? Just when Sudbai walked to the bed and prepared for another sneak attack, a vibration came from the distance, and a black mist immediately erupted from the bed, sweeping Subai to the ground. Subai, who was sitting on the ground, took a breath. With the cold air, the opponent's momentum can directly sweep towards me. How could I expect another sneak attack by following the example? A woman's figure appeared in the black mist, but the woman's lower body was that of a fox, her legs were covered with brown fur, and her feet were gripping the bed like two pairs of pliers. How come this monk isn't dead yet? The black mist rose, and the woman's figure floated up with it. Finally, she flew out and left here. It seemed that she was planning to deal with the place where the accident happened first, and then come back to continue enjoying her face. Subai was the only one left in the whole room. Subai put his hands together and recited Amitabha. This monk was so interesting. At this time, he didn't know where to make enough noise, otherwise he would end up. But it's really miserable. Standing up and taking off the red silk, Subai went to the bed with his upper body bare-chested. There were strips of cloth everywhere on the bed, but under the strips, there was a lot of dry and hard feces and a mixture of feces and urine. Obviously, the big fox demon usually eats, drinks, poops and hums in this bed. The stench of the bed is simply beyond description in words. However, among the mixture of feces and urine, Subai saw a foreign object. The object shone with a special luster and exuded a sharp aura. Subai climbed onto the bed, stepped on the dirty bed with his feet, and squatted down. Holding his breath, he stretched out his hand and resisted the nausea and vomiting to pull out the thing. It turned out to be a dagger, a completely black dagger. The dagger was inserted into the bed, and next to the dagger was a pile of white powder. Subai stretched out his hand and rubbed the powder, then recalled the friction sound before. Did the fox really grind his teeth with this dagger? Are these powders produced by grinding teeth? For a long time, Subai has been feeling helpless about his lack of attack power in his vampire state. Although it is estimated that he will have to wait until the end of the story world before he can save enough story points to exchange for the Hellfire shotgun, but now there is no weapon that is good enough for me, and I have to rely on my own body to resist the exchange of damage every time I fight, which always feels a bit embarrassing. Daggers, especially daggers that were obviously magic weapons, were things that Subai had hesitated to put together with the Hellfire shotgun before. But now they are fine and it takes no effort to get them. Subai held the dagger with one hand, and then pulled it out from the bed. Next, it was time to find a place to go out. Subai knew that the monk had many methods, but since the fox demon went there himself, so the monk it's hard to continue the commotion over there. The two sides are not on the same level at all. Subai didn't rush to the direction where the fox demon left to make any plans to rescue the monk. At this time, he just took care of himself. Come on, survive first, get away if you can. Looking up, Subai found that apart from walking up to possibly leave this ghost place, the only other way left was the path he had been taken in before in a sedan chair. That path might encounter the returning fox demon. Said, and there must be a lot of other ghosts there, just the blood river and the tentacles in the blood river are not something that I can easily deal with. Subai jumped out of bed and came to a rock wall. The rock wall was very smooth and had no pits. Therefore, there were no points for grasping with hands and feet. It was very difficult or even almost impossible to climb up with bare hands. However, Subai still found a rope, which was hanging here like a decoration. In fact, this rope was indeed a decoration, because the rope was made entirely of knotted and kneaded snake skin, colorful, and it's the kind of poisonous snake pattern. Subai grabbed the snake skin with both hands and pulled it down. Subai found that this thing was quite strong. Without any hesitation, he directly grabbed the snake skin with both hands and kicked his legs on the stone wall to start climbing up. Because he was worried that the fox demon would come back, Subai climbed quickly and tried his best. Finally, when he looked down, he found that the bed was already extremely small, and the monk's end seemed to be particularly powerful, dragging the fox demon as far as it was. Not back yet. As it went up, the crack became narrower and narrower. Sudbai's back could already touch the stone wall on the other side, and his legs could also rest on the stone wall in front of him. In this way, his back and legs could lift him up. The friction made Sudbai go faster. At this time, the wall was no longer so smooth, but there were small cave-like existences. Sudbai didn't know if he would enter some snake cave if he continued to climb up the snake skin. But in Sudbai's opinion, even entering the snake cave is much better than waiting for the fox demon to come back and be caught and then put on the bed to be ravaged. At least the former can die happily, while the latter is really worse than death. Climb up, keep climbing up, get to the top first. Suddenly, Sudbai heard a rustling sound 1 meter below him. Then, a person poked his head out of a hole in the stone wall. This was a man. The man was wearing sportswear and looked very tall. In modern times, it can be seen from the costumes that they are the audience and not the Aboriginal people in the story world. Because the hole was very small, the man crawled out on his hands and knees. As soon as he put his head out and took a look, he found Sudbai less than 1 meter above him. "Save me, take me with you, get out of here together, please, please, good people are rewarded, really, good people are rewarded." There was a look of pleading on the man's face. His body was already covered in scars, and he didn't know whether they were scratches or previous injuries. However, the man's mood was obviously on the verge of collapse. Sudbai ignored him and continued to climb up. Now he only thought that he could climb to the top as soon as possible, so that there was hope. That is, when the fox demon came back, he found that he was gone and couldn't catch him even if he wanted to. Now Sudbai was only more than 10 meters away from the top of the crack, and there were only a few steps left in the long march of 10,000 miles. Moreover, Sudbai found that the stone walls were actually painted with Buddha statues and engraved with scriptures. This made Sudbai think that this was a key location to suppress the fox demon. As long as he climbed up first, it would be impossible for the fox demon to come up and catch him. However, at this moment, Sudbai felt the snake skin in his hand vibrate. Sudbai lowered his head and found that the man crawling out from the small hole 1 meter below was grabbing the snake skin with both hands and pulling it down hard. Pulled, and then stared at Sudbai with a sinister look on his face. "My leg is injured. I can't climb up alone. You can take me up with you. If you don't, let's die together." No one can even think about going up. Obviously, the snake skin can support Sudbai's weight to the limit. It is hard to say whether it can support another person, not to mention that this guy is deliberately pulling the snake skin. Sudbai can even feel the snake on it. The fixed position of the skin has begun to loosen. Sudbai looked hesitant, and finally nodded, saying with a touch of panic and fear, "You come out first, and I will pull you up together. You hold my waist, and we will go up together." The other party was obviously very satisfied with Sudbai's attitude. He started to crawl out of the hole, holding the snake skin with both hands, and then climbed up with difficulty. His right leg was indeed dripping with blood and was indeed injured. After he climbed out, he reached out to grab Sudbai. Sudbai did not reach out to him, but climbed up 2 steps and put some distance between him and him. The man was obviously aroused, and his body started to swing like crazy, holding onto the snake skin. The snake skin was constantly loosening, like a rope fixed in one position, and now the fixed endpoint began to become unstable. "If we want to die together, if I die, I will have to ask you to be my backer, and we will die together, ha ha ha, I told you to play tricks on me, I told you to play tricks on me." The man looked up at Sudbai while swinging vigorously. Obviously, he still hoped that this threat would make Sudbai change his mind. He still wanted to live and climb up. Looking at the guy below who was walking around like a mad dog, Subai blinked. One hand reached to his waist. Pulled out a dagger. Then he lightly cut the snake skin under his hand with the dagger. The snake skin below Subai's position was cut off directly. Then fell down. Also falling together was the guy who was shaking his body vigorously just now. The guy had a look of disbelief on his face, and he suddenly understood that his previous threat was so ridiculous, childish, and low-level. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 99. Obviously, he didn't realize it before. In fact, as long as Subai cut the snake skin so lightly, he would fall directly underneath Subai. He had actually been able to threaten him just now and thought he had pinched him. Subai's Achilles heel. Moreover, the most important thing is that Subai could actually cut off the snake skin while the guy was still in the cave, but Subai didn't. Instead, he agreed to the other person's request first, and waited until the other person came out of the cave with his whole body to grab the snake. When the snake's skin was in the air, Subai cut the snake's skin again and sent him into a free fall. Just when the guy fell, Subai saw a black mist appearing at the bottom. Obviously, the fox demon was back. Subai took a deep breath, stopped paying attention to that idiot, and climbed up with all his strength. Anyway, it is estimated that the idiot will not die for a while, and he will still. The road is facing the sky, everyone goes to one side. In the story world, it is the duty to ignore death, but if he actually threatens himself with his own life, Subai doesn't mind giving him a ride. In fact, the stone wall was already quite narrow at this time. Subai only used the snake skin for strength, and the back of his feet kept rubbing to use friction to help him go up. If the unlucky guy before had not injured his leg, it really wouldn't fall directly. The fox demon below did not rush up directly. Subai first heard a heartbreaking scream, which was the scream of a man. He didn't know what kind of torture the guy suffered below. Finally, Subai grabbed the upper edge with both hands, and then climbed up. Sitting there, Subai could finally relax and take a breath. Stretching his head and looking down, Subai was so frightened that his body tightened. A huge fox face was right below Subai. The distance was probably less than half a meter. Obviously, the speed of the fox demon was beyond the scope of Subai's understanding, but the fox demon did not continue going up. The Buddha statue on the stone wall was faintly emitting golden light at this time, which made the fox demon very afraid. Finally, it glanced at Subai angrily, as if he planned to remember Subai, the ant that escaped from it, and then lowered his body to do what it liked to do. Subai took a deep breath, exhaled it heavily, and reached out to wipe the sweat on his forehead. Before, it was the sweat from exhaustion, but now, it was the cold sweat after just looking at the fox face. Looking around at the environment he was currently in, Subai found that it didn't seem as beautiful as he imagined. It was surrounded by stone walls. However, there was a place that was a little different in color. Subai walked over, stood under that place, stretched out his hand to fumble around, and sure enough, the stones in this place were stacked up later, as if they were blocking a hole. Taking out the dagger, Subai began to pry at the edge of the stone. Soon, one stone after another was pried out by Subai. There was no need to say how sharp or hard the dagger was. After the top was unclogged, a small hole that could probably allow one person to pass through appeared on the top of Subai's head. However, Subai touched the edge with his hand and found that there were many barbs. He didn't know what they were. The barb formed. But the current situation is that below is the fox demon's bedroom. Although the upper part is unknown, it is at least a place to go. The problem now is that Subai has not even triggered the main task. How to trigger the main task? To a large extent it requires the audience to dig in when there is a hole, go when there is a road, go up even though there is danger, and just sit here and wait, then it will never be possible to trigger the main task. If others trigger it but they do not, then in the end, Sudbai's end will be miserable. This is the helplessness of listeners, especially when making a choice. They have to choose the Tiger Mountain, knowing that there is a tiger in the mountain. This is also the most despicable part of horror radio. It does nothing, but allows the audience to consciously cooperate with themselves. The story was brilliantly performed. Sudbai's body began to become thinner. In the zombie state, Sudbai's body's physical defense would be greatly improved. Then he jumped up and started to climb up from the small hole above his head. Using climbing might be a little inappropriate. Should be described as creeping. The barbs on the side of the hole did not pierce Sudbai's skin in the zombie state, but were smoothed away by Sudbai. The cave was not very deep, only about 7 or 8 meters. Sudbai reached the top, but the top was not made of stone, but of wood. Sudbai's 10 sharp nails pierced directly into the bottom of the wood, and then cut the already somewhat a crack was opened in the rotten wood, and he got in. "Master, it's almost time, we can move the grave," a young man said to a middle-aged man wearing Taoist clothes. "Yes, master, I have prepared the incense case and the paper money. I am just waiting for you to take action, master," another young man came over and said. The Taoist priest was originally sitting on a chair with a cup of tea in his hand. At this time, 2 disciples came over to encourage him to start moving the grave. He took a sip of tea calmly, and then looked at his 2 disciples. "Disciple," snorted Akwan, Alyang, "don't think that I don't know what you have in mind. It's clearly not yet 3/4 noon. You 2 feel sorry for the eldest lady of the Chen family who has been in the sun for too long, so you urged me to get up early. Let's start moving the graves. You guys, moving the tomb might ruin the feng shui of the Chen family and affect the luck of the Chen family. The Chen family's business is so prosperous now, so the location chosen for the ancestral tomb of his family, it has a lot to do with it. Once one of them is not handled well, the family will be in decline or even destroyed. You will feel sorry for the Chen family's little germaphobe if she stands for a little longer, her family will be destroyed." Alyang and Akwan were standing aside at this time, obediently silent, but their eyes were still wandering around Miss Chen's body from time to time. She was a lady of the family, and she was indeed delicate and beautiful. On weekdays, she would be in the neighborhood alley. "The little girls I met were very different." The Taoist master sighed. In fact, it's no wonder that his 2 apprentices couldn't control themselves. In fact, he himself, ahem, immeasurable heavenly lord, immeasurable heavenly lord. "Uncle Ying, are you hot? I just brought some rock sugar and snow pear water from home. Drink some. It's not the time yet. Let's wait for a while. Don't be in a hurry." Miss Chen brought a bowl of rock sugar and snow pear water to the Taoist priest. The Taoist priest nodded and reached out to take it, but he did not drink it. Instead, he handed it directly to his apprentice. His 2 apprentices were delighted. As if the treasure was handed to them personally by Miss Chen, the 2 of them started to eat it. The Taoist priest shook his head. The 2 unsatisfied guys immediately stood up and walked towards the Chen family's ancestral grave. The reason why the Chen family wanted to move the grave was because they had dreamed for several nights that their ancestors had told them to do so. Change your home and find your own. At this moment, Taoist Master Lin suddenly noticed that a layer of black smoke was rising above the ancestral grave. The black smoke was very fuzzy and unclear, and an untrained eye could not see it at all. Did something really happen under this ancestral grave? Taoist Lin immediately waved to his disciple to hand over the peachwood sword. However, the next moment, a sea bowl was placed in Taoist Lin's palm. Akwan wiped his mouth and said, "Master, we left it for you, half a bowl." Taoist Lin was so angry that he threw the bowl of rice directly into his disciple's arms, then personally pulled out the peachwood sword and jumped under the head of his ancestor's grave. Everyone around was confused by this scene. Miss Chen walked up to Akwan and Alyang and asked, "Isn't it time yet?" Why did Uncle Ying go down early? Aquan was smarter and said directly, Master, this is to explore the path in advance to prepare for the next move of the tomb. Director Lin walked to the place where the black smoke came out and saw that the soil behind the tombstone was bulging, and sawdust rolled out. Dao Kang Lin was shocked. The tomb hadn't been opened yet, the lights hadn't been set up, and the coffin hadn't even been opened. The corpse below was already eager to turn into a zombie and come up. This is the first time even Daoist Lin has seen this kind of situation. Zombies are so impatient. And it's broad daylight. How dare zombies be so rampant? Taoist priest Lin held the mahogany sword in one hand and stabbed it directly. Immediately afterwards, Taoist priest Lin suddenly found that the end of the mahogany sword was caught by someone below. Dao Zhang Lin reached out and pulled out a section, and pulled it back from below. You and I, both sides. Passed. Hey, what is Uncle Ying doing? Miss Chen saw Uncle Ying standing behind the tombstone stabbing his sword into the soil and pulling it out again and again. Aquan was stunned for a moment, then Liang was the first to answer, this is the ceremony before moving the grave. The master is warning the nearby ghosts not to approach this area and not to disturb the peaceful sleep of Miss Chen's ancestors, otherwise my master's mahogany sword will send them to a complete loss. Dao Kang Lin held the talisman in one hand, and continued tug of war with the zombies below with the other hand. Then, he squatted down and reached into the mud hole with the talisman in one hand. Dao Kang Lin was really good at doing this, and he stuck it directly like this on the zombie below, but this zombie is very strange. It actually releases an extremely cold aura. This aura goes directly along Lin Dao Kang's arms and spreads throughout his body. Lin Dao Kang can't help but start to sway and tremble all over. It's so cold. Shivering. Looking from the perspective of Miss Aquan Liang and Chen, what she saw was that Taoist Lin suddenly began to sway all over. Miss Chen said doubtfully. Uncle Ying, what are you doing? Liang didn't know how to explain this time, so Aquan took the opportunity to say. Miss Chen, it's like this. My master just had an exchange with a shaman master in the town a few days ago. He learned from the shaman the method of channeling spirits. Now, Miss Chen, your ancestor has taken over the body of my master. What do you have to say? The ancestors said to go quickly now, which is very effective. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiao Long. Chapter 100. After climbing up to the top, Subai discovered where he had crawled. It was actually inside a coffin. The owner of the coffin had long been turned into a mummy, and it was so decayed that it basically broke into pieces when touched. Subai drilled after coming in, the body basically destroyed the original owner, which was really a sin. This is also interesting. They are actually buried in this place. I wonder if it is actually a ghost cave down there. Subai thought of the blocked place. It seems that the person who built the cemetery also discovered the abnormality below, but I don't know. Why did he just seal that place up, but somehow he helped Subai escape? Subai continued to scrape the coffin with his fingernails. This coffin obviously belonged to a rich man from the countryside. It was not a mausoleum for kings and generals, so it wouldn't be too deep. Subai thought about breaking the coffin lid and then trying it again. Just dig some dirt and you're almost out. Unexpectedly, when Subai had just scratched a crack in the coffin lid with his nails and was digging up the soil, a mahogany sword suddenly stabbed down, directly hitting Subai's shoulder. The peachwood sword has the effect of restraining evil spirits. In addition, Lin Dao Kang's peachwood sword was tempered and soaked in talisman water by himself. This sword directly pierced Subai's skin, and the sword tip disappeared. Subai suffered such a sneak attack out of thin air, and immediately let out a low roar. He grabbed the end of the mahogany sword with one hand and pulled it down. Subai's hand kept emitting white smoke, which was obviously burned. But he still didn't care. There was also a pulling force from the Daomu sword side, and the two sides were going back and forth, not letting up on each other. Just when they were in a stalemate, a hand came in, with the talisman in the palm, and it was directly and accurately placed on Sudbai's forehead. Sudbai's whole body seemed to have been cast a body-holding spell for an instant, but Sudbai in that moment, the cold poison was concentrated on the skin of his head, and his own cold energy was also transmitted along the other person's palm. Lin Zhenying was so cold that he kept swaying, while Sudbai remained motionless in the coffin. No one on either side took a step back, but for Sudbai, he was just frozen, and there was no serious problem. But Lin Zhenying is a mortal body. Even if he has a profound knowledge, he can't help the coldness for a long time. Therefore, after a while, Lin Zhenying took the initiative to retract his hand. The talisman on Sudbai's forehead lost its attachment to the palm of his hand. With the strength, he fell down directly, and he regained his freedom. He immediately opened his hands and pushed up, regardless of the situation, and pushed up, directly lifting the not very thick soil layer above, and then stood up on his own. Ah! 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 Aoyang, Akwon, and Miss Chen all stood nearby, looking at the zombies that suddenly came out of the cemetery, and screamed in fright. Lin Zhenying already had frostbite on one hand, but it was not serious. He immediately glanced at his apprentice and scolded. The ancestors of the Chen family have swindled their corpses. Please bring me the 8 diagrams mirror to retrieve the spider silk. Akwon and Aoyang then came back to their senses. Akwon pulled Miss Chen to retreat, while Aoyang turned back to get the package and took out things from it to give to the master. Ancestor of the Chen family. Sudbai was stunned. But at this time Lin Zhenying scolded in an extremely righteous voice. People have their own ways, ghosts have their own ways, and heaven has its own ways. If you go against heaven, aren't you afraid of being punished by heaven? Get lost quickly and find your way back, enjoy your descendants' incense, and leave a period of incense and love for now. Sudbai looked at Lin Zhenying and felt that this guy looked familiar. However, after Lin Zhenying finished reading these words, he did not give Sudbai much time to think and react. It is estimated that these lines are equivalent to what the police must say before they attack the desperados: you have the right to remain silent, but everything you say will become evidence in court. Thinking about it, Lin Zhenying did not believe that a zombie would return from its lost way, because as a Taoist priest, he clearly knew what kind of zombie it was. What kind of existence is no different from a beast, or even countless times more ferocious than a beast. Therefore, after receiving the Bagua mirror from her apprentice, Lin Zhenying bit her finger directly, wiped the blood on the Bagua mirror, then raised it and faced Sudbai. In broad daylight, with the sky clear, you actually dare to come out and show off your evil deeds. The sun shone on the Bagua mirror, and then refracted a red light, which hit Sudbai directly. There was a violent explosion and a fire broke out around the tomb. Sudbai managed to escape from the demon cave, but was already at the end of his strength. At this moment, he was unable to resist Lin Zhenying's powerful blow. His whole body was blown away and fell heavily to the ground. The clothes on his body and the original coffin also turned into a sea of fire at this time. Lin Zhenying was about to raise the Bagua mirror again and give Sudbai a final blow, completely incinerating Sudbai's body and eliminating future troubles. But at this moment, Miss Chen suddenly shouted, Uncle Ying, please be merciful, those are the ancestors of my family." Sudbai just fainted after hearing this sentence in a daze. "Oh, Master Lin, thank you very much, thank you very much." A middle-aged man wearing a uniform said thanked Lin Zhenying while walking into the Yizhuang with Lin Zhenying. Lin Zhenying is also responsible for the care of the village's Yizhuang. The county government will allocate money from time to maintain it. In ancient times, this was also regarded as a political achievement of the county magistrate. "Mr. Chen, what you say is too outrageous. Lin is entrusted by you, so he must do things well. In fact, your ancestor's corpse fraud this time was also due to Lin's own negligence. Lin Zhenying, he is an honest person and does not take credit, and even admits his mistakes. Master Lin is worrying too much, worrying too much. I think my ancestors also entrusted me with dreams because they knew that they were going to change, ahem, so they asked me, my unscrupulous descendant, to move his grave. Thanks to Master Lin's Taoism Gao Shen, if it was another Taoist priest, he might have really messed up everything. Now the remains of my ancestors are still intact. This is really lucky. Lucky, it's all thanks to you, Master Lin. Later, Mr. Chen is deeply grateful. Chen Yuanhui and Lin Zhenying walked among the many coffins in Yizhuang, followed by Quan, a Liang, and Miss Chen. Excuse Chen, please come this way. This is your ancestor. Lin Zhenying looked at his disciple. Quan and Liang understood immediately, walked over and slowly pushed open the lid of a mahogany coffin. The person inside was wearing an official uniform of the Qing dynasty. Chen Yuanhui stepped forward and looked over, somewhat surprised. Master Lin, why is my ancestor so young? Obviously, Chen Yuanhui was a little surprised by the young man in the coffin who was obviously in his 20s. Oh, I guess your ancestor, Mr. Chen, died young, Lin Zhenying explained. Oh, that's it. Chen Yuanhui nodded, then solemnly knelt down in front of the coffin, invited his daughter to kowtow 3 times, then stood up, took Lin Zhenying's hand and said, Lin Master, let's discuss the matter of reburying him in peace, and Chen still has something to ask, that is, if my ancestor is reburied, will it be a fraud, ahem. Of course Lin Zhenying knew what Chen Yuanhui meant, and immediately said, Chen Yuanhui can rest assured. As long as the tomb is chosen well and Zhong Zhenxiang's appointment is buried, nothing will happen again. That's good, that's good. Commissioner Chen, let's go to the front room and discuss it in detail. Okay, let's go together. Lin Zhenying and Chen Yuanhui walked out of Yizhuang. When they went out, Lin Zhenjiang called out, Quan, go prepare tea. Oh, okay, Master. Quan glanced at Miss Chen reluctantly, followed the master and Chen Yuanhui and walked out to the front room. Liang and Miss Chen were the only ones left in Yizhuang. Liang, you and your master are really amazing. That day, you really scared me, Miss Chen said with some fear as she touched her breasts. Hey, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. These are just commonplace things. I've seen even more powerful ones. Liang started to brag. Liang, you are so brave, you are the bravest man I have ever seen, Miss Chen said. Hey. I have been thinking about what you said to me last night for a long time, Miss Chen said suddenly. Liang suddenly became nervous. Last night he expressed his heartfelt feelings to Miss Chen and expressed his admiration. Now, is there any result? Miss Chen looked at the ancestor in the coffin and said worriedly, no, my ancestor won't be like that again, right? Don't worry, it won't happen. The master's Bagua mirror is pressed under him, and talismans are affixed everywhere on his body, making him very stable, Liang said. Well, then let's witness it in front of our ancestors. Huh? What did you say? Liang, close your eyes and don't peek, Miss Chen pointed at Liang and said. Liang immediately closed his eyes obediently. Miss Chen also closed her eyes, then moved her lips towards her and responded to her love with a kiss. Liang stood on the left side of the coffin, and Miss Chen stood on the right side of the coffin. The coffin was not very wide, so when Miss Chen wanted to kiss Liang, she had to pass her upper body over the coffin. Sometimes it is really hard for men and women in love to understand that they dare to talk about love in the Yizhuang, beside the coffin, and when facing the corpse of their ancestor, they still imagine that they are witnessing their love moment in front of their ancestors. At this time, Subai, who had been in a coma for a long time, finally woke up. When he passed out, he got out of the zombie state and became an ordinary person. Therefore, in the ordinary state, These things that deal with zombies have no effect on Subai. Bai is of no use at all, such as the Bagua mirror or the talisman. Unless Subai suddenly turns into a zombie again at this time, it will be just a mirror and a pile of paper to Subai. Lin Zhenying had mistakenly thought that Subai's changes were that the evil spirit in the zombie's body had been dispersed and turned into an ordinary corpse. However, she did not know that Subai was just in a deep coma and was in a state of suspended animation. After waking up, Subai subconsciously sat up from the coffin. He happened to be sitting between Miss Chen and Liang. Then, Miss Chen's first kiss. It was printed on Subai's face. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 101. People are often very sensitive when they first wake up, especially for Subai. The place he is in now is the story world, and his whole body is full of heavy guard. When Miss Chen's warm lips touched his face, what flashed through Subai's heart was not the joy of being blessed, but his hand subconsciously came to Miss Chen's neck. If it weren't for the lingering memory in his mind, with a hint of clarity, Miss Chen's neck had probably been broken by Subai. However, thinking about his current situation and guessing whose territory this was, Subai paused with his hands and slashed with a knife. On Miss Chen's neck, Miss Chen fainted immediately. Here, Liang was still waiting with his eyes closed in anticipation. In fact, he felt a little bit confident, so he still had a smile on his lips. Subai grabbed Liang's neck with one hand and knocked his head down. Liang's head hit the coffin and he fainted. Climbing out of the coffin, Subai looked at his current clothes. This kind of clothes had no specific style but was obviously imitating the official uniforms of the Qing dynasty, which made him feel a bit nondescript. In fact, by the middle and late Qing dynasty, official titles had become rampant. Many wealthy gentry families would donate official titles for their own sake. When buried, they would either put the official uniforms together in the coffin or wear them directly for burial. Of course, the monk analyzed it before. However, the current era should be in the middle of the Qing dynasty or even a little earlier, and the rules are not so broken. However, this is the mistake that horror broadcasting made when designing the plot of the story. Perhaps, it was just sacrificed for the fun of the story. Some rationality. After taking off Liang's clothes, Subai put them on, then put the naked Liang and Miss Chen into the coffin where he was before, and closed the coffin lid, leaving a gap so that they would not suffocate. After finishing cooking, Subai left this young couple who dared to fall in love in Yizhuang here, and walked out of Yizhuang. It was already dusk at this time. Subai stretched out. He didn't know how long he had been unconscious, but his injuries were basically healed. He was just hungry and walking around casually. Subai saw a place with smoke coming from the cooking pot. Place. This should be the kitchen of Yizhuang. On weekdays, Lin Zhenying and his two apprentices call Yizhuang their home. But now, a Quan, who had just made tea for the master and Chen Yuanwei, was cooking. Obviously, a Quan is very unbalanced now. Why is Liang accompanying Miss Chen there while he has to cook here? Damn Liang, stinky Liang, why don't you come over and help cook? A Quan complained while stuffing firewood into the earthen stove. He didn't know that Liang had already taken the initiative and secretly married Miss Chen. This kind of thing was a matter of speed and slowness. Subai walked past the kitchen cautiously. Although he was hungry now, he would not be full after just one meal. However, Subai would not suck blood from people in the Taoist priest's lair, then he would really make the relationship last forever. To the point of endless rest. In the front room, Yuan Chen was still discussing with Lin Zhenying the matter of relocating the grave and reburying him. Little did he know that his ancestor had quietly reached outside the door. Logically speaking, Lin Zhenying's vigilance should not be that low, but Subai is now in the state of an ordinary person. He can't feel the evil spirit, so naturally he doesn't know that the zombie he captured has come over. The doors and windows were all made of paper, and Subai didn't have to poke them himself. There were already a few holes. Subai moved his eyes closer and looked inside. He felt that the Taoist priest looked familiar before, and he was really good at Taoism. Let's take a gossip. Jing directly knocked him down. Although he also took advantage of himself, who was at the end of his strength at that time, Subai estimated that even if he used his zombie state to fight the Taoist priest in his heyday, his chances of winning would not be great. Of course, if you use the vampire state, the Taoist priest will have no natural professional advantages for you. At this time, Lin Zhenying and Chen Yuanwei had discussed the matter. Chen Yuanwei was about to leave. Lin Zhenying stood up to see him off. His frontal face was also exposed in front of Subai. Subai opened his eyes slightly and finally recognized him. Who is it? But there is a very absurd feeling. Lam Qingyang's zombie movie was once a smash hit, setting off a big trend of zombie movies in Hong Kong, but it was a pity that he died young and died of cancer in his 40s. But his screen image has almost influenced several generations. The horror broadcast has implanted him into the story world, which is indeed equivalent to a seamless connection. At the same time that Subai recognized Lin Zhenying, the sound of a terrifying broadcast suddenly came out in his mind. Main Mission 1 released, protect Lin Zhenying from death within 7 days, / Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 102. She just came back from shopping for groceries, and Long went to the kitchen to help. She pushed Long out of the kitchen and said, "Go code quickly. Then I'll call you to eat when I'm ready." Standing at the door of the kitchen, watching her carefully put the vegetables into the oil pan, and stir-fry with a spatula while fearing the splash of oil, Long felt very complicated in his heart. She is also a little princess who usually does not touch Yang Chun Shui. In the eyes of ordinary people, she can be regarded as a rich girl. However, due to a bad stomach, she cannot eat Sichuan food for a long time, so she starts to buy food every day. After dinner, I would help Long make soup. Because Long was used to coding late at night and going to bed in the morning, he would let Long drink it when he was hungry at night. She didn't know how to cook, so she learned to cook according to the recipes, but the dishes she made were quite delicious. The day before yesterday, she took Long to IKEA, which is a chain of home furniture decoration stores. Long originally thought that she just wanted to go shopping, because after Long came to CD, he was renting a house, so he naturally did not need to buy any furniture or anything like that. Then, when she came out of IKEA, she took out a bunch of keys and said that her mother had given her the keys to a house, and asked Long if he wanted to go and have a look together now. As long as the decoration was done, the two of us could live there. Went in. Long refused, saying that he was too tired to read and would go back. Perhaps, Long is lucky. At a time when most men of his age in China worry about a house in order to marry their girlfriends, Long's mother-in-law not only did not set up such obstacles for Long, but also took the initiative to give him a house. But this is not what Long wants, it is not feudalism, and it is not machismo. It is just that Long has always felt that as a man, it is his duty to make money and support his family. Moreover, Long is not here to be a son-in-law, either. He had never thought about her family's money. In fact, when they first met, she was just a streetwise female author, and Long didn't understand her family's situation. She returned the key to her mother and said that Xiao Long had to save money to pay the down payment to buy a house. Perhaps, she would feel that the man she chose was very strong, but Long knew that she had always wanted to live in her own house, and the rented house could not give her a sense of security. In the past, Long thought that it was silly for a young person to be bound by a house and to lower his quality of life in order to buy a house. But now, Long has changed his mind because she has that condition and she also has that life level, because he wanted to be with Long and then wronged himself. Long felt very sorry. She is silly and innocent, and her first love is with the dragon, so she gives everything, silly. However, the dragon can't just be stupid beside him heartlessly, otherwise it would be too selfish. Before, Long had always been very willful. After all, this year, Long was considered a recent college graduate. In terms of mentality, he was more like a willful and unrestrained big boy. I came to CD to find her and rented a house next to her house. What I gave her was nothing more than an irresponsible touch and a romantic feeling. But that month, after paying 3 months' rent and buying daily necessities, Long paid her own money. When I didn't have enough, I borrowed some money from friends. Then I relied on the daily appreciation money from the official account for my living expenses during that period. I got up every day, looked at my WeChat wallet, saw the extra money in it, and then planned today's expenses are covered. So I would like to thank all the friends who praised Long on the official account during that time. A while ago, one of her best friends heard that she was in love and living with a man. She asked her about Long. She sent her a photo of Long, and then told her best friend about Long. Her best friend responded with some contemptuous remarks. "What are you planning?" Yes, Long once asked her what she was drawing, and she said that Long's serious attitude when reading the characters was very handsome and attractive. Haha, although Long himself thinks that there is really nothing interesting about a big fat man sitting in front of a computer with a bulging belly and typing on the keyboard. Tonight at 12 o'clock, horror broadcast will be on the shelves. The subscription results, especially on the first day, play a big role in estimating the potential of a book and the status of a book in the eyes of editors and websites. And impact. At 12 o'clock tonight, the VIP chapter will be released at 12 o'clock in the evening on July 31st. Long hopes that everyone can do Long a favor and subscribe. After being put on the shelves, the daily updates will become 3 updates a day. Today's 2 updates will be moved to the same time after they are put on the shelves. This means that after 12 o'clock tonight, there will be 5 updates. On the premise of not affecting the quality, Long will do its best. Long-time readers of Long should be aware of this fact. Long has always been very diligent in updating. Long's idea is very simple, that is, after it is put on the shelves and the subscription results come out, he can joke in front of her, which is a small reward. Well, you really have a good eye. You can find me, the 1 in a million fat guy. Look, he has become a god.